Welcome everyone to today's session of the InfluxDB Community Office Hours. My name is Caitlin Croft. Super excited to have you all here. I'm sure people will continue to trickle in. Just wanted to let you know that today's office hours, we have Tim Hall, Samantha Wang, and Russ Savage all here from our product team. So Russ and Samantha will be providing an update, and then we will have lots of time for Q&A. So a few people already emailed me a few questions. We will answer those, as well as any questions you feel like throwing at them. Please feel free to put them either in the chat or the Q&A. I will be monitoring both. And this session is being recorded and will be available for replay later today on our YouTube channel. So it'll be lots of fun. We definitely want questions. If there's something you want to ask that you think might be too long to type, I'm always happy to unmute you so you can actually talk directly with our product team. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Russ.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. And thanks everybody for joining. So as Caitlin mentioned, my name is Russ Savage. I'm Director of Product Management here, working a lot with the open source tooling. And I'm excited to talk about InfluxDB open source. So after nearly 2 years in alpha and beta, InfluxDB is finally going GA. I had finally on the slide, they made me take it out, but I'm super excited about it. We're going GA, and today I'm going to talk about some of the steps that are still remaining on the road to GA. So if you haven't already tried out the beta, I really encourage you to do so, and I'll talk a little bit more about the steps as we move towards a GA process. So we jump to the next slide. So officially, the next release of InfluxDB open source will be the first release candidate. So again, normally we've had approximately a two week release cycle for our InfluxDB betas. It's been a little longer this time, and it's for good reason. So we made some pretty awesome changes behind the scenes to make it a lot easier to get to our release candidate, and we'll talk about those in a minute. As we move into the release candidate phase, we will continue to address any bugs and defects that are raised, and we want to limit the new features. So, if you've been using our beta throughout the course of this, every release has new capabilities and new functionality, and sometimes breaking changes. With RC candidates, we want to limit those new features and breaking changes so that so we can get to a stable system. We will have upgrade tooling in place for existing InfluxDB users. So if you're on the 1.x line, you'll be able to upgrade in place to the 2.0. There'll obviously be a documentation and a process to follow, and we'll talk about some of the details a little bit later. Reasons why you would or wouldn't want to upgrade right away. Existing alpha beta users, they can migrate their existing resources and data. So the steps are being documented right now, and if you jump into community Slack, I just shared kind of the PR that we're using to kind of finalize that document. There won't be any automated tooling, but the steps boil down to a handful of commands that you can run, and they're pretty straightforward. So shouldn't be too bad. And if you run into any issues or problems, reach out to us and we'll help you through those. And then once we GA, our plan is to do maintenance releases on a monthly basis. So those will be any of the patch fix releases, and then we want to do feature bearing releases quarterly. We want to really stick to that schedule because the release process, a good release cadence helps everyone, helps us and helps the community. So. So those kind of the plan for getting from where we are to GA in the coming months. So if we jump to the next slide. let's talk about some of the recent, major changes that have happened. That again, I mentioned it's been a little longer since our last release because we've been working on some of these major changes. So, we've decided to update the underlying storage engine to be compatible with the 1.x format. So that's awesome. What that means is that you won't have to convert your existing InfluxDB time series data to do the upgrade. You might have to move it around a little bit, but you won't have to convert all that information, which will save you a lot of time. Be super awesome. The default ports we changed from 9999, which we were using during the alpha beta period. We changed it back to 8086. So again, trying to keep that upgrade in place. If you do want to use the old port, you can always set that in your command line profile or in your command line options. And that's okay. But yeah, so the next release will move the default port back to 8086, just like the previous InfluxDB. We also added read, delete, drop InfluxQL support to the API, which is super awesome. That means that any existing integrations using InfluxQL will most likely work. Obviously, there's some capability in terms of select into and others that might not work if your integration is using that. But most of the integrations are reading data from Influx using InfluxQL. Should be good to go there, including Grafana. And then of course Flux is being upgraded to the latest version. So so you'll be able to have all the latest updates in the Flux language, which is super powerful. And if you haven't tried playing around with Flux, or if you have any questions about Flux queries or the best way to write them, they made some awesome improvements recently, including support for profiling. So jump into the Slack channel for the query team or the Flux team and ask your questions. They're eager to help our engineers. All right, so those are some of the major breaking changes. I think I don't anticipate any new breaking changes between now and the first RC, but of course, and we really want to limit any breaking changes when we're in the RC period. But of course, the caveat, if we find a major problem or something that's uncovered, we might have to make a change. So we reserve the right, but we really want to try to limit those going forward. Awesome. So if we jump into the next slide. So with those breaking changes, with the migration path, we know that jumping major versions for any software is tricky, and database software can be extremely tricky. And so, I want to be totally upfront and transparent and with the community on the reasons you might want to hold off on upgrading the day we drop GA. So a couple of things that are not going to be in the initial version, and you might have to do some significant changes to migrate. So if you're a heavy user of our continuous queries capability, that won't be in 2.0 in any way, shape, or form. And so you'll need to convert those continuous queries into Flux tasks, which is our background processing in the 2.0 world. So if you're a heavy user of continuous queries, you have to do some research, and we'll obviously have a lot of documentation coming to help you along that path. The other thing you might want to hold off on, so if you've got many users of your InfluxDB open source with a bunch of authorization and permission structures, you'll probably need to reconfigure those users when you upgrade. We use a different permission and authorization scheme in 2.0, and so we're working on some tooling to make that easier, but that won't be available in the initial release. And so if you are an admin of InfluxDB and you've got detailed permissions, you have to read that carefully and make sure that you can reconfigure those correctly in the 2.0 world. The other thing is, if you're writing data into InfluxDB with some other format that isn't line protocol via HTTP, so if you're using UDP, Graphite, some of the other integrations there, those won't be available in 2.0. You'll have to leverage Telegraf in conjunction with InfluxDB in order to get that same capability. And so setting that up and configuring it will take a little bit of time. And we want to help you get there. So if you have questions about setting Telegraf up to work with InfluxDB, let us know in Slack, and we can help you do that migration. The other thing, we will have limited builds available initially. So if you run a non-Linux operating system, you run InfluxDB on a non-Linux operating system, probably hold off on upgrading. The binaries just won't be available. And so as we get further, post GA, we want to add binaries as it makes sense. So that'll be something that'll come later. And InfluxDB has a Prometheus remote endpoint. That capability won't be in the initial GA release. So if you're using Influx behind the scenes for Prometheus storage, long-term Prometheus storage, you'll probably have to hold off on upgrading until that is available. So I think the general guideline is, what we want to do is we want to get a GA out there, and we want capability for the vast majority of users to move over. If you're a more advanced user, we're going to work on the coming releases, so a 2.1, 2.2, to bring new capabilities and make that migration much easier. And along the way, as we discover, what our users are doing in the open source community and what additional information and documentation they need, we've got teams ready to document that and share it. So, again, as always, if you have problems or if you're running into issues doing this process, we want to hear about it. Jump into the Slack channel and let us know. So if we jump to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the migration path for existing alpha beta users. So we're really appreciative of the users out there who have played around with our alpha and beta and given us great feedback. It's been invaluable, and we really appreciate it. With the major breaking changes that have come through, unfortunately, the migration path for existing alpha beta users is a little more complicated than just a drop-in replacement. And so, we've tried to make it as easy as possible. But a couple things you'll have to do at a high level, and again, there'll be documentation to walk you through all of these different steps. But existing users, you'll need to reconfigure your third-party integrations. What'll happen when you move from your existing alpha beta release to the RC? It'll wipe out your tokens, and you'll need to reconfigure those tokens and integrations with third parties. So it shouldn't be too hard, but you will have to regenerate those. Existing users, you'll need to export and import your InfluxDB resources in the CLI, right? So it's super easy to do with the new templates capability and the stacks capability. And just a shout out, if you have not played around with InfluxDB templates and InfluxDB stacks, I encourage you to. This is a great time to do so. What they allow you to do is manage all of your resources in InfluxDB via GitOps pattern, and so they let you check all your dashboards and tasks and resources into version control and set up automation for checking that stuff out locally, making changes to it and deploying it into prod. So really powerful and really useful workflows for people that are trying to incorporate GitOps workflows into their process. So this is a great time to check it out. But there is a one-liner: export all of your old stuff and import it all into the new system, and that will just work. You'll also need to migrate your data from the current storage format to the new one. And depending on how much data you have in InfluxDB, this could be a quick process, and this could be a not so quick process. So similar to the export all your resources and import, you can leverage the CLI to dump out your raw data and then load that raw data into your new instance, and you can stream between them. So again, there'll be documentation on how to do that. It's basically 2 commands for one for each database or each bucket. So it's not too hard, but if you run into problems, let us know and we'll figure out how to help you move that data over. And like I said, full instructions are being documented as we speak. PR is open, and the link is in the Slack channel if you're curious and want to take a look. Yeah, so the migration path for existing alpha beta users, unfortunately, it's a little more involved than just doing a an update of the binary. But I think we really want to make this easy to migrate from or upgrade from a 1.x into 2, and so these changes unfortunately were required. So, but again, if you have any problems, let us know. We'll jump in and help you. And then finally, really want to make a call out. We need your help. I've talked about this during this presentation, but the first RC is going to be released in the coming weeks. We're planning for next week, but we'll hopefully get that out in the coming weeks. We really need you to grab the latest RC and help us shape the future here. So we're going to do as much internal testing as we possibly can. But we don't have all the use cases that you guys do, and so really need you to grab those, try it out with the data, try it out with the process that you're doing, and give us feedback on what works and what doesn't work. Best way to give us feedback is via the community Slack channel or GitHub. I am either Russ on Slack or Russ Arat on GitHub. You probably see my name around on issues. If you mention me, I'll definitely see it. If you don't mention me, I will eventually see it. But I'm really excited to get your feedback and incorporate that into our process. So so I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, just to add one thing, Russ. Like we know we've had about 2,000 people engaged in the alpha and the beta releases, and we really appreciate the feedback that we've gotten through that process. Mm-hmm. If you have been working with us on those early releases, that's great, and we'd love to have you continue on in the RCs and providing feedback. But for those that have held off because it's like, hey, like I'm not really interested in the super early releases, like now is the time to jump in, particularly to explore the in-place upgrade instructions, which you can start by copying your data directories, and we'll provide instructions on how to do that. To run in a side-by-side fashion, right? To just try out that process. So we're expecting that, this is not a one and done, obviously. If we're doing a release candidate, we're going to move to GA, that you can run these side-by-side and try it out. And that's the area where really would love to get feedback on what's worked smoothly and where you're running into challenges, so we can continue to improve this as we head towards GA.
Yep, totally. Thanks, Tim. Awesome. Well, that's all I had for open source GA. Again, stay tuned. RC should be out in the next week or two, and we'll continue to iterate on that for a GA release in this quarter. So, really excited. And now I will pass it over to Samantha.
Cool. Thanks, Russ. So I'm going to go over quickly some new additions that we're going to have in our next Telegraf release. This is all stuff that's currently in master, but will be GA in the next release, which will be out in the next couple weeks, next month, probably similar timing with GA, with the OSS GA too. So you can upgrade all your stuff at the same time. So just wanted to talk about, we're seeing a lot of growth with Influx around IoT usage, industrial IoT usage, and kind of two main, in terms of you reading data with Telegraf from these IoT devices, industrial IoT devices. We released a Modbus input plugin, I believe a couple quarters ago, sometime earlier this year, which we've already seen a lot of traction around. And we've just merged in an Opc Ua Input Plug-In. And I think the big emphasis around here is that with these two input plugins, we cover a good majority of the industrial IoT market. I think Tim likes to say 80%, talking with a lot of people in the community that kind of a lot of stuff can be done in the industrial IoT world with Opc Ua, and just kind of historically Opc Ua has been kind of the legendary kind of protocols in the market. So we're really excited to get this out to just cover a vast majority of those use cases that are out there. So hopefully that you guys can use Telegraf to be monitoring these devices. So a little bit about the Opc Ua Input Plug-In. I think important aspect is that it pulls the Opc Ua metrics on a time interval basis. So if you're reading, if your time interval is set to 10 seconds, which is kind of the default, it will be pulling the metrics at that certain time. So if an event happens in between, it won't read it at that specific event, but we'll pick it up afterwards. So that's kind of important, that this is not a subscription-based input plugin. We have I opened another issue out there. If that's something that you would like to see and just understanding your use cases around there, feel free to chime in with your feedback. If you would even like to write a subscription-based Opc Ua plugin, that would be awesome. But I think that's really important to understand with this new Opc Ua input plugin. But just wanted to kind of show you the sample input, kind of what it would look like to configure. Relatively simple, like our rest of our input plugin, Telegraf input plugins, to configure based off of what Opc Ua devices you're doing. This is an example I've used from a simulator, and I'll show you exactly what it will look like on the next slide. But yeah, you would configure each individual node that you're reading, and that will be dependent on the metrics that you would output, that you would see. So here you can see that there were 2 nodes configured, I think, in the simulator, random and triangle simulations, and you would get a line protocol measurement for each one on the same, copied in the same on each time interval. And I guess to emphasize too that there's kind of the authentication configurations are in there as well. So if your device doesn't require them, then they're optional. But if they do, then you can configure those as well. Yeah. So to quickly just go over node configuration, it I guess seems relatively simple. I've been working with a couple community people who have tried theirs on some Kepware devices. This is the simulator I was using. So your device and your Opc Ua kind of GUI will probably look similar, but may vary. But the important aspects are what's highlighted here: the namespace, the identifier type, the identifier, and the data type. The name and description are all things that you would identify yourself and name yourself, and kind of what would be determined in your output. But yeah, so here you can see that the node ID, kind of just all on that node ID line, you would get your namespace of 3. Your identifier type would be an integer, kind of string is common as well. And the identifier here for this random node is 1002, and the data type as well as double. So those are the main information you would need to pull for each node that you're trying to measure. I guess this is just really what it ended up looking like. So this kind of from the Lime protocol I had a couple slides ago, reading it into your Cloud 2 instance, kind of is relatively simple. So you would see that I have my random and triangle data in here too. So once you can get in there and get it up and running and monitoring your Opc Ua devices. That's actually all I have, but yeah, to emphasize that this is currently in master of Telegraf now, and will be in the 1.16 release of Telegraf. And yeah, if play around with it, test it, open any issues that you foresee or enhancements that you would like to see. And again, mentioning that the subscription-based Opc Ua, if that's something you would like to see as well, please hop into our GitHub and I guess ideally find that issue and comment along there. So that's all I have. So I think, Caitlin, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Samantha. So next, we're going to just open it up for Q&A. So prior to today, a few awesome community members sent us a few questions. So I threw them into the slides, and so we're going to have our panelists go through them. Obviously, if you think of any questions that you would like to ask, either about what they've talked about or anything InfluxDB related, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat as we go through these. So the first one, the person said, I'm currently researching collecting streaming telemetry from Cisco network devices and came across the Telegraf Inputs GNMI Input Plug-In. The way it appears to work is that by Telegraf reaching out to the switches themselves to collect the data, sort of like a puller. What is the suggested way to use the Telegraf Input Plug-In inputs.gnmi to achieve redundancy? With the data being sent in, I can simply put the Telegraf containers behind a load balancer, but the data being collected the other way around by Telegraf, that doesn't work, as multiple containers collecting duplicate data and sending that data to the time series database isn't ideal. Do you have suggestions? So Samantha, Tim, Russ, do you guys have any insight here?
Samantha, I think you're on mute if you're talking. Yeah, so background on the streaming telemetry, it was put together by our friends at Cisco, and they built it and manage it. So in terms of suggestions on how to use it, what I would do is, if you have questions or concerns, jump into the Telegraf repo, or if you have suggestions for how it can be updated, we'd love to hear an issue about it, and we can flag the original developer of the plugin and help answer those. But that's true with a lot of Telegraf plugins, right? It's like a lot of them are developed for very specific technologies that we'd love for us to be total experts in, and a lot of them we are, but some of them are very specific to the plugin. So best way to do that is harness the power of the awesome Telegraf community. Open an issue with your question or suggestion, and we can get feedback there.
Yeah, I think the broader question here, Russ, is if you're going to poll and you want to avoid a single point of failure with Telegraf, what are some techniques that we might suggest when it's a polling based system, right? And so couple ideas, right? One is, and by the way, if there are community members that have solved this problem already, feel free to drop your solution in the chat. The first thing is resolution, right? So you could attempt to overlap the Telegraf instances such that they're polling at an offset. So think about it sort of like this. You have one Telegraf instance that polls at one interval, and the other one is trying to poll in between. What you can do then is reduce the polling interval of the individual Telegraf instance, and so that each one is essentially doing half the work. You could think about it that way. So your collection interval essentially is longer on one instance and the other. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure that from a when the Telegraf pushes the metrics to your InfluxDB instance, that essentially they are interleaving their metrics. So if you lose one, that means the other one is going to continue to provide the polling activity and send you data, but obviously you'll lose some resolution. And so that's the way I would think about solving that kind of problem, is essentially make them do half the work each, use them both in an active-active configuration, and then try to change the configuration settings so that from an overlap perspective, they're each feeding metrics in. That will allow you to continue to have visibility and access. So that's the approach I would use. Now you can all rip that apart and tell me I'm stupid, as normally technologists do. But that's an approach I would use.
Yeah, makes sense. And just to clarify, the current GNMI plugin, it uses a subscribe method from the telemetry data. So it subscribes to a source of telemetry and gets those responses. So it might not be as as problematic as you think.
Yeah, there's a few that work that way, right, Russ? I think the MQTT plugin also is a subscriber-based model.
Yep.
So yeah, it's just yeah. So check it out. Try that approach. Let us know.
Perfect. All right, so the next question that we got is there any control over JSON response format for the query endpoint? I have values that are serialized as exponential notation for some values and all digits for other. All values are just 32-bit floating point precision, but serializing them using 20 digits with a bunch of trailing zeros, as InfluxDB does, causes a serialization problem.
Yeah, so I can take that one. So you can export data from InfluxDB 1.x in JSON format. Unfortunately, JSON does not support all of the different data types that InfluxDB does, and so there's some incompatibility when you start doing that with especially larger values, which causes some problems as you're seeing. Unfortunately, there's not much control over the JSON response format coming out. But what I would suggest is if you have a specific concern about the data that's exported, there might be different techniques to solve that. I would suggest opening an issue in the InfluxDB repo and adding your data, your use case, and kind of what's happening now and what you expect. And we can have someone take a look and see if there's anything we can fix in the JSON serialization code to support that. You know, again, I'm not certain that there is because of the limited support for large numbers in JSON, but we can certainly take a look.
Yeah, so there's some other workarounds you might consider. One, can you cast it as a string? So if you cast it as a string as an output, then yes, it's your responsibility to convert it back into a floating point when you receive it back, but that may allow you to preserve more of the shape of the digits that you're working with. Second is you could use Flux. So Flux query outputs now are returned in CSV, not JSON format, and so that should actually preserve the structure of the data a little bit more easily. So both of those are available. And one thing Russ mentioned as part of the upgrade from 1.x to 2.x is that both the compatibility endpoints from a read and write perspective are available on both editions. So starting with 1.8, we introduced the 2.0 read and write APIs so that you could start working with those. Again, you may not choose to jump to 2.0, but if you wanted to start building applications against those 2.0 APIs, you can, as sort of future-proofing the work that you're doing. And you could take advantage of the new client libraries that exist that obviously leverage the 2.0 APIs, and that sort of prepares yourself for the future. And then we've also done the same for 2.0, as we know that some of you are like, I already got this stuff running, and I don't really feel like either changing the client libraries or changing the APIs until there's a specific maintenance or other kinds of activity that I want to take on. So you don't have to do that either. The read and write APIs for 1.x will be available on this first RC that comes out, and we'll continue to maintain those in the 2.0 release line for quite some time to provide maximum overlap for you in both directions. And so in saying that, how does this relate to the question that was asked is, well, Flux is also available on 1.8, supporting that read endpoint. And again, you may be able to get better precision resolution and less workarounds by using a non-JSON format. So that would be my suggestion.
Perfect. All right, so the next question that we received is, I'd like to see an example of a Prometheus summary within an InfluxDB 2.0 dashboard showing a P50 and P95 quantiles using the Flux Prometheus histogram quantile function. I think, Russ, you had,
Well, yeah, I'll take this one. So Flux has a capability of doing quantile calculations on data. What I would recommend is jumping into the Flux channel in Slack and posting this question to get some more detailed information. But in short, you can take any values. There's the Prometheus histogram quantile function. There's also just a standard quantile function. If you're looking for just quantiles on non-Prometheus data, but jump into that channel, and our Flux engineers can help provide examples for how to leverage this specifically with the data that you're working with.
Yeah, or another, if a community member has already sort of built an example around this, you could create a template file that contains the dashboard that shows this off, and you could drop that into the Slack channel, and people could start playing with that example. And we can obviously look to build one and integrate it within the documentation set. But Russ mentioned that mechanism, stacks and templates to be able to move your assets around. That's also a way that you can share your expertise with others. As I know, Ignacio, who has been very active in our community templates repo, he's on the call, and we appreciate all your contributions there. You're definitely leading the way for the community members. So thank you so much for everything that you've done there.
Great. So we'll just go through, if any of you have been on this community office hours before, we just like to remind everyone of all the different resources that we have available to the community. And if you think of any questions during this time, feel free to post them in Q&A. All right, actually, before we jump into the reminders, Brian asked, I frequently use a query that asks for the last value for a large number of measurements, but using last and wear time. This causes huge I/O problems unless I can provide a lower bout for time as well. Can you explain this?
Lower time band. Yeah, for sure.
Bounds. Yeah.
Sorry, Brian, we got it. We know typing fast sometimes, but I understand the text of it. Yeah, there's only two things that you can do at the moment. The first is try to shorten the time range. And the second is, this is an area where Flux will help you. If you actually try the same query out in InfluxDB Cloud, I'd love to hear your feedback in terms of both the performance and the I/O. The idea for us is that Flux will be pushing down the ability to find those points faster. And we'll look to introduce that in the open source. There's a ton of performance improvements that we've made on Flux itself. That's been some of the community feedback that we've gotten. It's like, yeah, it's great. You guys introduced a new language, but now it's not as fast as InfluxQL, which we totally get. But we've introduced the bulk of those improvements into cloud first, and then we'll be moving those into the open source here over the course of the next, well, certainly some by the time that we get to GA, and some additional ones will arrive afterwards. And so, yeah, the reason is because there's some optimizations that are required to basically reduce the scan that's going on to find the last value. And so that's what's happening is it's unpacking the TSM file and looking for the exact match in the where clause that you've constructed. If you have a tag that you can specify or other criteria in the where clause, that can help speed it up as well.
And I unmuted you, Brian, if you wanted to expand or ask the panelists any further questions.
Now that's good to hear because the fact that you're aware of that, yeah, it seems like it's going into like a scanning from the very beginning of time. Yeah, it looked like I was getting huge IO weights on the server because of that. And it's good to hear that you say the Flux QL, you're doing some performance improvements. That was kind of a follow-up question I had. Is I noticed there were certain queries I had with Flux's improvements with Flux QL that were much more performant than just with the Flux language. Currently, I had to move away, started out doing things in Flux, but had to move away from that just because of the performance issues. But it sounds like you're addressing a lot of that.
Yep. So those will arrive in the open source release, and then if you're on enterprise, then we'll look to upgrade the Flux engine to take advantage of those. That'll be the next step for the enterprise customers.
Do you feel the reverse is not a problem getting the? Also, do you know what the first value is once in a while on something? Does it always start at the very first shard moving forward? Is that why that maybe that one might be faster? Or
yeah, that's some of the optimizations that that can be introduced, and same thing for top and bottom. It's a similar kind of approach. The problem with last, right, is it has to figure out based on the time range that you supply. It has to start and then scan from there to see based on all the series that you're identifying. So if you can reduce the number of series that it's looking at, that may also help. But if you're asking for every series, right, the last point for every series that you're looking at, it has to unpack a lot, because obviously if you're working with, particularly if you're working with sparse data, it has to keep going to find those points, and then the same thing first and last is the same kind of push down optimization.
And I know specifically in Flux, I know that that first is faster than last.
I use shards just to limit it. I look at what's the last shards, and I just take like the last 2 or 3 shards of an RP, and then that's helped by providing a lower bound. At least give me a first guess at a lower bounds on time.
Yep. Yes. For sure, because then you're telling it exactly where to look. And then if there's no result, there's no result, right? So if it's a series miss, then you'll get nothing.
Yeah, that's the one downside of that method.
Yeah, that's the challenge. It keeps having to go back until it can find a data point for all the series that you're asking about. So second question is there an equivalent to Power Pivot in InfluxDB, a simple way to write queries and explore data similar to business intelligence platforms?
Yeah, I was I saw that come through, and I'm not super familiar with how Power Pivot works, but I was just glancing through some of the capabilities from their page, and I think so. In short, a ton of the capabilities that it looks like Power Pivot does around importing data from different sources, editing different data in tables, creating calculations and different views on that data. It can all be accomplished using the Flux query language. So Flux is very much a table-based system and is able to bring data in from different sources. What I will say is, we believe, internally, definitely that the explore capability of our stack is super valuable. So we're always looking for different ways to explore, and I think we're looking at different ways to enhance our data explorer to make sure that a lot of times you won't need to write a query in order to get the information that you need. I don't think there's a drop-in replacement for something as advanced as Power Pivot, but definitely the capabilities to do a lot of that stuff exist in the Flux language. And our UI right now, we're in the process of building out a new capability that will allow you to define kind of a base query and do a bunch of different transformations on top of that really easily. Which is something that you can sort of do in our current data explorer, but it's not as powerful as we'd like. And so we're looking at different experiences to improve data exploration within the platform, and it's definitely on our list. So look for more information on new ways to explore your data coming soon in the 2.0.
Yeah, I think there's some other things I would add, Russ. So one is you can actually export. Like if you have a rough query that will encapsulate some amount of data that you want to play with, You can download that directly to CSV and then drop it into your favorite Google Sheets or Excel, and then hack at it at will. But obviously, it depends on how much data you're trying to work with. We have been working on integration with other third-party visualization tools and data science tooling. So we've been working hard on the Google Data Studio integration. Maybe we can plug that a little bit, Russ, in terms of find a link and maybe drop it in the chat where that lives. That's more on the visualization side, but it does allow you to connect to Influx and manipulate data in a variety of different ways. And then for those that may be interested in the data science world, we've done some work to provide first-class support for Jupyter notebooks and Apache Zeppelin, so that you can actually author a Flux query and then work with that data set as a data frame inside of both of those tools. And so again, it's not exactly the Power Pivot stuff, but if you're trying to, wire up one or more tools to Influx, we're definitely going down that path. Not just Grafana, which is the most common one that people use, but more that are being added over time. So if you have suggestions, Power Pivot's a good one. We can add that to our list to see what would require to get that wired up. But if there's others, let us know. I know Tableau has been suggested, Click, and a few others. So.
Yeah, and I've also seen users being able to connect directly into Power BI and pull information into there. So I think there's an integration out there that I'm struggling to find the link for, but yeah, that's another avenue.
Great.
I think Russ and I were actually working on leveraging InfluxDB with Domo for other dashboarding and visualization as well, by creating a custom connector. So again, the APIs are exposed, they're out there, and that's another great area where community members can contribute. So yeah, we'd love to hear your use cases of how you're putting those things together. And I know Caitlin would be wildly enthusiastic about even getting blog submissions. We can highlight your accomplishments and integrations to other community members if you're up for it. So we're always looking for that as well.
Maybe I'll reach out to Ignacio Sala after this call, and we can dive further into the Power BI stuff. So, cool. So, while we wait anxiously for other questions, just want to go through a few reminders. So Samantha, if you can skip to the next one. So we have the community forums. So definitely check it out if you want to. It's a really great resource to ask questions, answer questions. There's tons of Influxers in there who are answering questions every day. So it's a fantastic resource. And we also post announcements of stuff that we're working on as well in there. Next, we have the InfluxDB Slack. I know Russ plugged it a bunch of times. So the Slack is open to everyone. Feel free to join. There's a ton of different channels in there. So we definitely encourage you to go in and look around and find channels for the areas that you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in building InfluxDB templates. There's an entire templates channel there with people there ready to help you build your template or provide feedback on what you're doing. So it's what's really fun too is at Influx Days, there's a ton of chatter over Slack during the conference. So it's a lot of fun. And then we also have the subreddit. It's not that active, but we just want to let you know that we are there for those who are on Reddit. So if you are there, we are there as well. Just it's the least active. I would say the forums and the Slack are the most popular. Next, I'll go over just a few announcements and resources, and just some friendly reminders. We have our time series meetups. Obviously, given the current climate, they are virtual. So the next time series meetup is actually next Wednesday at the same time. If you go to that link there, you'll be able to register for it. A community member is using InfluxDB to monitor his 200-gallon saltwater aquarium. He loves growing his own coral, and he also has a ton of fish in there. So he's pulling a ton of metrics about actually the coral itself, the water temperature, all of that. So I think that'll be fun. As he said, he's stuck at home and he has nothing. He's got even more time to devote to his aquarium. So that'll be fun. Next, obviously, we have these community office hours every month. They're posted to YouTube. This one will be posted to YouTube later today. So feel free to come back to the community office hours page. It'll be updated later today, and you can register for the next session of the community office hours. We try to mix up the speakers so that there's different experts on the call to answer your questions. But oftentimes, you know, Samantha and Russ and Tim join us. So feel free to come. You know, we love seeing familiar names and faces join the community office hours. We also have the community showcase, which is just a central area for all things community. So we list everything from events, obviously virtual events, you know, maybe if there's an Influxer speaking at an event, we'll post it there, any webinars, or even also articles that you guys share online about how you're using InfluxDB. We like to consolidate it all there so that you can find it and learn from community members. Samantha, can you skip ahead to slide 25, please? Perfect. So we, of course, as many of you probably know, we have what we call Influx Days. It is our annual conference. Normally, of course, we would be getting excited here in San Francisco for you to all come to us and visit us in the city, but it's going to be virtual this year. So Influx Days North America will be taking place on November 10th and 11th. It'll be completely virtual, and over the course of the 2 days, there will be live sessions from a bunch of different Influxers. Paul Dix will kick it off. Tim Hall, who's on right now, he kicks off the second day with a product roadmap session. Samantha also has a session. We have a lot of, because it's virtual, you know, we can't have everyone unfortunately live, so we will have lots of on-demand sessions that will be available to everyone the day of. And 2 weeks prior to Influx Days, we will have our hands-on Flux training. I know we've talked a lot about Flux, and if you're interested in learning more, the hands-on Flux training is run by a couple of data scientist professors who are based in Italy. They're fantastic. They built the training. They have given it now multiple times. And, you know, with every iteration of the course, they do update it based on feedback from the students as well as where Flux is today. And just to keep the student to teacher ratio sufficient for that course, there is a fee attached to it. The actual conference itself is free. And one of the things that we know that our community really loves at our events is just hanging out with each other and, you know, hanging out after the conference, going out for drinks and dinner and just having fun with each other. So on the first day of Influx Days on November 10th, we are going to have a happy hour and trivia. So trivia is one of those things that Influx really has always loved doing internally. Russ, who's on the call, runs it with one of our sales engineers, Craig. So they are going to do a trivia session at Influx Days. And one of our team members who's on the design team, he's a real big foodie. He loves all things food and mixology. So he's actually going to do a little mixology demo. So it'll be a happy hour and trivia on the first day. So we're really looking forward to it. I know that in June, when we had the first virtual session, people really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. There were still lots of chatter over Slack after the event. So we're really looking forward to it. We're excited to see you all there. And feel free to register. It's completely free. And if there aren't any more questions, that sort of wraps up today's session of the community office hours. If any of you on the phone think of, or on Zoom, I should say, think of any questions after the fact for our panelists, feel free to email me. You should all have it. Feel free to email me, and I'm happy to connect you with Russ and Samantha and Tim. I know how it is. You get on these Zoom calls and you think of questions after the fact. So feel free to send them along afterwards, and I'm happy to connect you with the right people. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you all next month.